What's up, Grail Nation? You know, I don't think this is a Retro Gem Miner video, because I don't think the Retro Gem Miner plays his games, and my opinions here aren't really satirical, they're just how I feel about video game difficulty, specifically regarding the NES and how people are talking about it. So, Retro Gem Miner hat off, let's just talk about game difficulty for a minute. Some people say old games were unfairly difficult. Obviously, this opinion's been out there forever, but over maybe the past decade, it's evolved further from old games were hard to old games were straight up poorly designed, archaic, and unplayably difficult, often by a younger generation who never really spends any time learning how to play these games. The main complaint I see about NES games boils down to ultimately not being able to beat the game the first time around. And this is probably the complaint I'll give the most credibility to, but only to a point. NES games often involve some form of memorization or experience needed to beat it. I think how much is usually overstated, but safe to say you probably won't beat the Turbo Tunnel your first time around. Barring infamously memorization-based sections like that, I think it's unlikely you'll even beat World 8 of Super Mario Bros. The first time around. You got sent back and you had to get better and better until you could do it. And that brings up game overs, a concept entirely foreign to games now because they're like 150 hours long at minimum. The people who complain about this style of gameplay hate getting sent back to the beginning. But you know what you get out of playing those earlier levels over and over again? Experience. You get good at the entire game, which is absolutely something missing from most modern games. Your first time playing Super Mario Bros. Looks something like this. And jump! Alright, alright, got him. Let's get that question mark block up there. Let's just, let's get up. Missed it. Oh, just a coin. All right. What the hell is that? Okay. Let's get that. Let's see oh my god! After you play Super Mario Bros. For a few hours, the first few stages feel more like this. Hidden one up block. Knew that was there. Bam! Fire flower. Don't need it because I am God. Hidden star block. I'm the best. Yo! Call it what you want. I like calling it flow. It's that experience of going back through a level and just crushing it, and that's entirely missing from modern games. Only speedrunners really bother to go back and learn paths and strategies through a game now, and while that's super cool, I don't subscribe to the belief that if you want games to be hard, you should artificially impose challenges like speedrunning onto yourself. Part of the reason I come to games is to see how a game designer can challenge me in a new way, not to make my own challenges for myself. Part of the problem is that modern games are essentially disposable. They're designed to pull you through the story and then be shelved forever, or if you want to keep playing, you can go to multiplayer or turn up the difficulty and everyone has more hit points now. Nobody beats Ninja Gaiden for the first time and says, "Hey, I finally did it! Alright, let's move on to the next game now." No, they say, "Damn, that was fucking awesome! I'm gonna see if I can do it even better now!" With Uncharted 4, a game that's largely about on-rails cliff climbing segments with scripted character conversations, that is basically the opposite of how I felt after beating the game. So I said I give this argument against NES games the most credibility, because some people simply don't want to get good at games by replaying them over and over. And that's fine, that's great, because there are so many games now that don't force memorization or skill-gated progression upon the player. But because this is the vast, vast majority of games designed now, we've largely lost that feeling of pride and accomplishment, of overcoming a difficult trial, or being able to absolutely crush a game and blast through it in 20 minutes, just normally playing through it without being a speedrunner. And this is a tangential conversation, but don't tell me that 20 minutes is too short for a video game. I've played Ninja Gaiden 3 for more hours than I played Skyrim, because Ninja Gaiden 3 is the best 20 minutes of my day. I can beat it 3 times back to back and it doesn't get old. Skyrim, while it's a great game, it doesn't scratch that gameplay itch in the same way. If you put Elder Scrolls time into a Ninja Gaiden game instead of giving up on your first game over, not only will you beat it, but you will definitely master it. And does that sound repetitive? Well, don't get me started on how games repeat the same bullshit over and over and over and over because game length is more important than a concise, high-quality experience. Climbing walls, stealth tailing missions, this guy, this guy, this guy! That's a related problem, but that's not what I'm talking about. Back to difficulty. With no challenge, there's no reward. Yeah, games now have all sorts of different rewards that didn't exist in 1985. Good loot, epic story payoff. God, that was so fucking epic. Exploring a beautiful world. But that feeling of beating Jackio for the first time, right after wondering if you would die and get back to level 6-1, that's a pretty common feeling when beating an NES game, and that rush of adrenaline followed by that relief of success is far from the norm now. And Oh man, let's go off on this for a second. The same examples come up when you point out that games, for the most part, aren't challenging anymore. Dark Souls, Cuphead, usually some indie platformer. It used to be Super Meat Boy, now it's Celeste. Dark Souls came out in 2011. The fact that people are still pointing to this game, this series that came out in 2011 as proof that most games today, in general, aren't easy should be proof enough alone that games today, for the most part, are too easy. But let's get back to NES games. Other old game design elements. Let's talk for a second about NES game design concepts like knockback, respawning enemies, and random elements. Two games that come up often in this are Castlevania and this recurring favorite example of mine because it's nearly a perfect game, Ninja Gaiden. Yes, in Ninja Gaiden, you get knocked back when you get hit, and sometimes that means you fall into pits and instantly die. Okay, don't get hit next to pits. Like, what? I mean, I know that's not an answer, but you think it's like an oversight that sometimes you get knocked back into pits? Like the developers didn't realize that, oh man, if the player gets hit while standing here, that could lead to his instant death. Should Mario have blocks at the bottom of pits in case you accidentally fall in so you can just jump back out and continue playing the game? That's level design, man. That makes you play more carefully around pits and be more deliberate with your actions. In the best NES games, which Castlevania is certainly one of, there are no random enemies that just knock you back into pits and there's nothing you can do about it. The enemy placement in these games, I would argue, is 100 times more deliberate than the enemy placement in games of today. Pretty much the same thing goes for respawning enemies. Ninja Gaiden's wacky infinite enemy spawns aren't some oversight in the game design, although I could see why you would think that if you've only played it for 15 minutes. Even if the infinite spawns weren't originally intended to be a feature while the engine was being developed, the level design and enemy placement take advantage of the concept in a beneficial way. Yeah, this bird keeps spawning when you kill it, because if you could just kill it and then jump, it would make this entire screen trivial. You can jump over it and take a hit, which is probably the most basic way past the screen, or, once you've mastered this screen, you can get past the spawning bird without even getting hit. In games like this, you have to treat each screen as a puzzle to be solved, not just some mindless enemies to hack through. Your first time through, you can usually figure out some solution that merely gets you to the next challenge, and then improve upon it with time. Maybe there's a power-up that lets you skip through a screen entirely. You can't approach Ninja Gaiden like God of War. You don't enter a screen and there's a bunch of enemies and you just press square, square, triangle until they're all dead. There's a pattern to be figured out, and more often than not, there's a best way to do it. Figuring this out is the game. Executing what you figured out is rewarding each time because you know how hard the screen was before you figured it out. And random elements? I can't defend this if you don't like it. Yeah, the first time you make this jump, a bat is going to come and hit you, and you're going to die. And it's going to waste, what, all of 45 seconds of your time? But every other time you make that jump, you're going to jump over that bat, and you're going to feel smarter than the game because you knew it was coming. It comes back down to executing a strategy for each screen, or just hitting those one-up blocks in Mario because you knew they were there. If there's too much of this, it turns into trial and error nonsense, certainly bad game design. But you know, one or two blind bat jumps or memorization-based falls gives me this I won't fall for your tricks game feeling every time I easily overcome one of those cheap deaths. And don't get me wrong, there's tons of shitty NES games. Not everything olden is golden. There's a fine line between the adventure of discovery and not knowing what the fuck to do because the game barely gives you any feedback. I can even give a Ninja Gaiden example. Ninja Gaiden 2, a great game by the way. You can mentally segment this game into different puzzles, just like with the other Ninja Gaiden games, but frequently it's just an intentional clusterfuck of enemies. The best method for clearing a screen is sometimes, frequently, maybe usually, just taking a hit and powering through during your invincibility frames. There are also these environmental hazards that push up against you, and it basically just slows the game down or makes you wait for a few seconds before a jump. These aren't good game design elements. Bump and jump. It's both skill and memorization based, but it doesn't always give you a chance to humanly react to the other cars, so it can feel more random than fair. Ikari Warriors. It's a brutal, lengthy game that takes extreme memorization, cheesy strategies, and persistence to legitimately beat. These games aren't good because they're NES hard. And I'm sure there's an extreme adrenaline rush associated and the pride and accomplishment and all that when you beat Ikari Warriors legitimately. But it comes at the cost of this busted, unfairly difficult game. I'm far from arguing that all retro games are good games and you damn Fortnite kids just don't understand them. But if you've played Contra once and you say Contra is too hard, fucking Contra, then I guarantee you are dismissing an entire genre of entertainment without even giving it a chance. I think you can divide video games into two broad categories. There are fucking video games, and then there are content tourism games. One isn't better than the other, one isn't more hardcore than the other, they're just different types of media. Although obviously I have my personal dying favorite compared to the now mainstream norm. Fucking video games are focused on gameplay. They're games in the sense of this Merriam-Webster definition, any activity undertaken or regarded as a contest involving rivalry, strategy, or struggle. And don't get me wrong, being very challenging or difficult is not the criteria here. But the main reason you're playing a fucking video game is because the gameplay itself is stimulating. Breath of the Wild, for example, it dumps you into Hyrule and it says, it's time to save the world, go figure out how to do it. There's no 30-minute tutorial, there's no lengthy intro cutscene. Oh, and by the way, if you wander off too far in the wrong direction, this spider thing's gonna obliterate you with a fucking laser. You figure out what to do and you do it. It's a fucking video game. Content tourism games are about the experience. To pull up a different Merriam-Webster definition for game, activity engaged in for diversion or amusement. There is absolutely nothing wrong with these games, but they choose to hold the player's hand on a tour through some wondrous world or story rather than present them with obstacles to overcome. I can't make this clear enough. These are great games, but they're a different form of entertainment entirely. If you die in BioShock, you just respawn at the last Vita chamber, and you continue to mow down the same damaged enemies you were just shooting like 5 seconds earlier. If you die in Skyrim, something that almost never happens, it just puts you back to the beginning of the area that you're in. If you miss a jump in Uncharted 4, again, nearly impossible because it guides you on every single jump along the way, it just respawns you on the exact jump that you just missed. It's not just the lack of penalty for losing either. You can almost pinpoint the way the industry changed to the release of the Xbox 360 or Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Oblivion is one of the first games I remember that really took that Legend of Zelda exploration, I can't wait to discover everything on this map experience and just jammed it onto the rails with a quest marker. If your game has a quest marker in it, there is close to a 0% chance that it's a fucking video game. In Morrowind, some of the first instructions given to you are, hey, you need to find Caius, go to the South Wall Corner Club in Balmora, someone there might know where Caius is. And it's like, shit, you have to use your fucking brain. I'm not in Balmora, so I must be somewhere else. I need to figure out where Balmora is and then search around for the South Wall Corner Club. I bet it's on the south side of the city. So you find out where Balmora is, you head out north from Seyda-Neen, you follow the path through the hills, and once you get to Balmora, you actually have to start looking around to figure out where you're supposed to go. And then someone gives you directions to Caius' house and you find him. Not only do you legitimately feel like an actual actor in this world, but just because you used that tiny little bit of brain power because the game didn't treat you like a moron, it made it more rewarding to get to Balmora, and literally all you did is find the guy who gives you the main quest. In Oblivion, a game I love by the way, 10 out of 10 in my book, you get a quest marker. So forget the path, just beeline through the trees and mountains to get to your next thing. Is it a dude I need to talk to? Is it an item I need to pick up? Is it something I need to kill? I don't remember. Once I get there, I'll just click it and move on to the next quest marker. It isn't just that these are 10-hour or 50-hour long movies. There's more to playing a video game than that, even when it's an entirely linear story-driven thing. But you have to agree that wandering around and mapping the dangerous, mysterious planet Zebes in Metroid is not really a comparable experience to loading up on quest markers in Oblivion, and then just seeing what wacky journeys they bring you on. And look at this. Is this a puzzle? Matching up icons with the same icon? Is this a puzzle? Rotating a sphere so it says W and then putting it on top of the other W? This is just busy work in the framework of a video game puzzle. These are games that, per the ESRB, are made for adults, but they treat the players like infants in their quest to make sure that there are no roadblocks on the way to progression. To be clear, it's a balance. The exact opposite of this is really bad too. You could be stuck in Maniac Mansion for hours, having to resort to trial and erroring everything with everything because you don't know what to do. But because of the content tourism philosophy, puzzles that force the player to use their adult brain for a hot second are pretty much disappearing from anything except for the puzzle genre. This is a philosophical shift in how games are made. There's no retro elitism about this, and that's why I made sure to include lots of pretty box art from modern games like Breath of the Wild or The Witness. The Witness is quite possibly the most fucking video game ever made, because it was made by this asshole, and he thinks he knows more about game design than these assholes. And he fucking does! The Witness isn't inscrutably cryptic. It doesn't punish the player by sending them back, there's no Twitch action skill needed to beat it. But it doesn't have a tutorial, it doesn't tell the player where to go, and it isn't full of busy work. The entire game progresses through a series of little aha moments that the player constantly figures out to get to the next step for themselves by using their brain. The Witness sure isn't an NES game. Not only do you get the reward from the challenge and discovering things for yourself, you get the more modern reward of just exploring a beautiful island, or uncovering the story. Or maybe not loot, but the reward of constantly unlocking new areas in the game. Both literally unlocking them and gaining the knowledge you need to go back to previous areas and solve previously unsolvable puzzles. The Witness isn't my favorite game ever or anything, but I endlessly appreciate how it doesn't insult my intelligence, which is far from the norm these days. Fucking video games aren't every last shitty NES game. The advances in technology and game design implemented in The Witness shows us that games can be better than they ever were. There's nothing unique about the 1980s. Technology and design can break down barriers between the player and the game. Clunky UI, bad controls, unintuitive gameplay, tutorials, busy work. These are all things that get in the way of you in the game. But these advances can also be used to break down the elements of a game that make it a game. Puzzles, mystery, allowing the player to discover things for themselves, and most importantly, challenge. Those first barriers are almost universally bad. That's the dividing line between something that's just shitty and old and something that can stand the test of time. That second set is the difference between a contest, the strategy, the struggle, and an activity engaged in for diversion or amusement. Making the player put in effort is not bad game design. One of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes is about a criminal who dies and gets everything he's ever wanted in the afterlife. He gambles and always hits the jackpot, he gets all the girls, he robs jewelry stores and the cops never catch him. And you know what happens? He gets bored. There's no chance of losing anymore, so it's just not fun to win. And it turns out he's been in hell the whole time. Spoilers. Going on a journey is fun. Even if there's no real danger or challenge to it, everyone likes a good story. Skyrim is a nice place to visit. That's the name of the episode. But I don't want to live in a world where that's the only kind of game that I can play. Say you love Batman. Batman is in about 400 current comic books. Then say over the past 10 years, DC has started to phase out Batman books because it turns out a big audience prefers stories in movie and audiobook form because they require less effort to digest. You don't have to go to the store and pick up a book every week and actually flip through the pages. But wait, you like hand-drawn art. You like the way that a comic can tell a story in just 22 pages. You like the feel of that book in your hand. But everything's been phased out and all that's left is Detective Comics. And not only has the market shifted, but a generation of kids who never even grew up on comics, they're around now saying, look at how archaic that is, stories printed on paper that you actually have to read. You can finish the entire book in 10 minutes. And you complain, you point out why you like comics, and comics and movies aren't necessarily better or worse than one another, but the industry stopped making as many comics, and it's a goddamn shame. But then some jackass comes up to you and says, why are you complaining about the state of Batman? You still have Detective Comics. Get it, Detective Comics in this story would be like Dark Souls because he's bringing it up, but really it's just one of the last remaining bastions of fucking video games. It's an analogy. So in conclusion, the point I'm really trying to make is that these video games are for fucking children. Play some real fucking video games, you fucking casuals!